This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Welcome everybody to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. And let me tell you, if you're listening to this and you say, man, I like that Andrew Cooperrider, I like the sound of his voice, I like the way that man looks, I like what he talks about, well, you can check me out right here on 970 Sundays at 6 p.m. and also on WBNA Wednesdays at 11 for the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So you can tune in. You can get a double dose of me this week just by doing that. But today, I'm very excited. I'm joined by Representative TJ Roberts. Representative Roberts, thanks for joining me. Can I call you TJ?
Of course you can.
Okay, so a little background. Me and TJ have known each other for 5-6 years or so. So we've known each other a little while. So if it seems a little familiar with the representative here, it's just because we've been friends for some time. TJ, thanks for joining me today. Driving all the way from northern Kentucky. Where's your district at?
So I represent District 66, which is northern and western Boone County. So that is Burlington, Hebron, Francisville, Rabbit Hash, Petersburg, Bulletsville, and a little bit of unincorporated Union. So it is the very northern tip of northern Kentucky.
Oh, well, fantastic. Thanks for filling us in. I didn't know all those towns existed in Boone County to begin with. So, well, thank you, TJ. And I think your background is more interesting to me than some other legislators I talk to. So a lot of times I see legislators just kind of jumping in. Maybe they're businessmen or maybe they were, just people in the community that were kind of well known before they get involved. But you, on the other hand, longtime activist. I mean, when's the first time you knocked on a door for political reasons?
So the first time I knocked on a door, I was 14 years old, and that was knocking doors for Congressman Thomas Massey in his first actual election. I wasn't involved in the special, but in the one where you had a door knocking effort for his first go, that was my first time. I'm actually a child of the Tea Party movement. There's a photo of me at the age of 12 at a sign wave for Rand Paul in 2010. Longtime family supporters of Ron Paul, people along those lines. Just largely I grew up in the movement of limited government and Christian constitutional conservatism. So that was my first time, and haven't stopped since.
Who
even
all
when
have
I
you
tried.
knocked for? Just some candidates you've knocked for.
So Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, Donald Trump, Savannah Maddox, Steve Doan, Felicia Rayburn, Aaron Yates over in Lexington, Nancy Mace in South Carolina, Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, Anthony Sabatini in Florida, Matt Gertler in Georgia. I have been around
You've
the
traveled
country.
the state,
Yes.
like knocking doors. And that's like kind of the interesting side about your story, because you also, I know you wrote some articles for some different websites and everything else too as well. So you were heavily involved with, I guess you'd call it the conservative wing of the Republican Party. Some people would call it the liberty wing of the Republican Party. I'd call it the conservative wing of the Republican Party. And kind of coming from that, then becoming an elected representative, I mean, obviously you've got those chops, you've got that background, but how does this differ from what you thought it was like being a representative? Now that you're elected, you're in office, what's different to you?
It was a lot of what I expected. The thing that's particularly different was just the way to actually get a bill through passage. So I'm an attorney by trade, and one of the things that I've been trained to do is overcome objections and have these conversations and listen to folks and really try to get through what it takes to actually get something codified into law. One thing as well, I do think that killing bad legislation is just as important as passing good legislation, but really the inside legislative process, that was quite different from what I expected. All in all, though, I think I did a
In what
decent
ways
job.
was it, you think, different?
So one of the issues, like obviously everyone knows, you can just see it publicly, is counting to 51, right? I'm only 1/100th of 1/2 of 1/3 of the government of Kentucky. In order to get a bill across the finish line, I need 50 of my colleagues to say yes. I need them not only to say yes, but yes so much that they want it to come to the floor. I need 20 of my colleagues in the Senate to also say yes. I need to find one person to carry my bill on the Senate floor. And I need them to say yes so much they need it to come to the Senate floor. And I need them to have enough energy to be willing to vote for that bill twice, because I can almost guarantee you that if I am the author of a bill, Andy Beshear will veto it, because I will not introduce legislation that he supports.
So as you're counting these whipping votes in order to get a bill passed and everything else, what do you find is the main motivation? How do you get people to vote yes? How do you motivate other representatives? Because obviously there's individuals who are very ideologically driven, and I know you consider yourself one of those, and we can think of some other legislators that it's just an ideological argument. But one of the things for me that I guess shocked me when I've worked on getting some bills passed myself is, I come in and I'll talk about something from a Republican ideological side of things, from a conservative side of things, and they really don't care. I've had bills that I'm talking with individuals in the legislature saying, hey, look, you say you care about tourism and you care about driving in dollars into the state. Look, this bill will kill tourism. Here's XYZ reasons why. And the person turned around and said, I don't really care about that. There's a guy in my district that wants it passed, so I'm going to vote for it. And, so you run into these situations. What have you found kind of is the overall motivation, and how do you work through that?
I think a lot of the motivation is part of what you just said. Do the constituents care enough about that? And that matters. We're a system governed by consent of the governed. The voters have the ability to take me out of office if they are not satisfied with the job that I am doing. And that is the case for all of my colleagues, and that is the case for every elected official out there. Now, you want to go to the administrative state, just go pure ideology, because those folks aren't accountable electorally. But on top of that as well, one of the main issues when whipping votes in internal conversations, you have to identify that there is a problem that society is facing, and it's a problem severe enough that a sizable number of people are upset over that problem, and then you have to show that your bill is the solution to that problem. I think that method has been very persuasive, at least for my issues, of just showing. Just one example of a bill that didn't move this session, but it did result in the governor getting sued in federal court, my House Bill 352. House Bill 352 banned in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. It required our universities to report their immigration data to ICE, and it also made it to where if an illegal immigrant is negligently admitted to a public university and that illegal immigrant turns around and commits a crime against a Kentuckian, that victim or their family, in the event that the victim dies, may sue the university for damages.
And what's interesting about that issue is that, people would think like, oh, this must be a new thing Beshear's doing. But I remember in 2022, I was in a debate, and one of the questions asked was, do you support illegal immigrants getting in-state tuition rates? And I was so taken aback by I'm like, of course not. I was so taken aback. I'm like, hey, is this a trick question? Of course not. I mean, are we accepting illegal? I mean, these are state government institutions, our public universities are. Are we accepting illegal immigrants in? And if we are doing that, is it not a ruse to get them to be like, oh, I gotcha,
Right.
You fell for the trap, you're deported now.
So
what's the deal?
We are admitting illegal immigrants into public universities, and ever since Steve Beshear was governor, we have required that illegal immigrants with high school diplomas get in-state tuition in Kentucky. This is one of the number one.
Why do illegal immigrants have high school diplomas, though?
So that's a federal law, by the way.
Right.
Federal law requires K through 12 education for people who are here illegally. I disagree with that. I can't touch that, but what I can touch is our university system. And right now, we are costing taxpayers in Kentucky approximately $5 million a year to accommodate illegal immigrants. So there's the problem, right?
And to be clear, when you're talking about the tuition, I saw some people say, oh, look, it's just loans or grants or things or whatever, but that's not quite what's going on. I know for UK, for an example, if you're from out of state, I believe tuition is about $33,000 a year. And then if you're coming from in-state, it's about $15,000 a year. That's a pretty significant difference, and it's built upon the idea that because you're an in-state citizen, your tax dollars, your family's tax dollars are subsidizing that public university's existence. But if you're an illegal immigrant, you are definitionally not paying those taxes, most likely. I mean, maybe sales tax and things, but you're not paying income tax. You're not paying a payroll tax. You're probably not paying property taxes. And so you're not subsidizing that. So it really does rip off those citizens that are paying those taxes.
Right. And that's precisely it. And one of the things that was good, so that bill ultimately didn't move. We had a 30-day session. We just ran out of time. I have no doubt if I got it to the floor, it would have passed.
So just pause there for a second, though. You said, okay, so we've got a 30-day session. We ran out of time, everything else. I mean, technically, it only takes 10 days to pass a bill.
Correct. It doesn't take much time to pass legislation, but the reality is there is a significant political class. I mean, every bill that attacks a government institution is an uphill battle. It's like suing the government. You have so many hurdles to go through. You wind up with taxpayer-funded lobbyists using your tax dollars to lobby against your interests. And that was the case with this bill. Fortunately, though, after session, I was able to coordinate with the Department of Justice and get the governor sued over this issue. And I look forward to seeing in-state tuition for illegals get abolished.
Well, coming up after this, what we'll go ahead and discuss, though, because I want to return to that idea, because I think for a lot of voters out here, a lot of listeners, it is very frustrating when there's this easy issue and we can't get it done. So when we return, we'll be talking about that.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. We're about to dig into our next segment here. But before I do, if you're listening to this and you say, man, that Andrew, I like what that cat's got to say. I like the conversations he's having. Well, you can listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show right here on 970 and WBNA. It's at 6 p.m. on Sundays on 970 and 11 p.m. on Wednesdays on WBNA. I am joined by Representative TJ Roberts out of Northern Kentucky. Before the break, we were discussing, he had a bill this last session. It's become kind of a part of public knowledge now about Beshear offering in-state tuition rates for illegal immigrants here in Kentucky. That's about a $20,000 a year discount to illegal immigrants to go to school here in Kentucky. And we were discussing how you had a bill on that last session. And you said, hey, look, we wanted to pass it, but we just ran out of time to do it. And before the break, we were discussing how does that happen? I mean, this is a easy, straightforward, obvious issue for Republicans. I mean, even if you're just sheerly politically driven and not ideologically driven, this should be a no-brainer because it creates those headlines that are quote-unquote hot right now with the conservative base. If that's all you care about, you don't actually care about being a real Republican. That's what you care about, doing what, just looking good to the base. That's the kind of thing you vote for. I mean, you propose this bill, you work it, you can't get it passed. What was going on? What was the argument back against it?
There really wasn't an argument against it. What there was massive political force against the bill. So the ACLU, they prioritize in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. That is one of their number one priorities, and there's still a sense of fear in them. I'm not afraid of these guys. I'm not afraid of any left-wing organization. I know for
Where do you think that comes from? I mean, I do hear that all the time where they're afraid of these groups that I can't personally, like the ACLU, I don't see why. I could see why maybe some Republicans out there in purple seats may be concerned about, like very tight seats. But we've 80% of our legislature is Republican. Most are in very safe Republican districts where literally, they're going to win no matter what in the general. Why are they so afraid of these groups?
I think that a lot of the fear just comes from the money that they have. So the ACLU, they're a loud group as well. And I think a lot of people mistake noise for volume. And by volume, I mean the number of people. If you asked a Kentucky taxpayer, just random off the street, do you want your tax dollars going to subsidize in-state tuition for illegal immigrants that we don't even offer to all U.S. citizens? They would be offended that you're even asking that question, because the answer is obviously no. We should not have taxpayer subsidies for illegal immigrants. We should have taxpayer subsidies for mass deportations. So you have that group as well, but also you have taxpayer-funded lobbyists, and the universities are the worst offenders of that. I mean, my goodness, the effort you have to go through to hold...
Let's rewind real quick. Let's define that term.
Sure.
Taxpayer-funded lobbyists. For those who are unaware, that is groups or entities that are either government actual entities. For example, I know here in Louisville, you have the water department, the city itself, the fire department, the police department, the sewage departments. They actually hire lobbyists with your tax dollars to then go down to Frankfurt and lobby. So you have some direct like that, but then you also have groups like, for example, like you're talking about the universities, or you have groups like the County Clerks Association or the League of Cities, or other things that people are paying, taking your tax dollars to pay memberships into. Then those groups hire lobbyists to come up and lobby the legislators. And so it's essentially using your tax dollars to ask the legislators to give more of your tax dollars to them. You know, you're kind of funding your own demise here, but I just want to make sure we define that before we go forward.
I mean, and these groups, the universities, there are entities that think that the labor market is going to crash without illegal immigration. I disagree with that. We have an embarrassingly low workforce participation rate. I don't think we should be protecting illegal immigrants. I think we should be getting Kentuckians back to work. But they use your tax dollars to go in and just flood the legislature with messaging against bills. And this bill was one such. And I can think of other instances where the universities were...
What was their argument, though? Like,
there really wasn't an argument, and needless to say...
We need to educate the illegal immigrants. It would be a shame if they were dumb illegal immigrants.
I mean, it's a DEI argument. The way the ACLU frames it, they call it tuition equity, which, I'm sorry, but I don't think...
Well, they charge the same amount to
out of state, right?
Out of state, just wouldn't that be tuition equity? They're out of country.
Well, I mean, I think equity would be treating you in line with your circumstances, and I would say equity, if we're being actually equitable to individuals who are here illegally, deporting them would be the equitable treatment.
Yeah, sure.
So, but that's the thing is
let's not get carried away, TJ. Okay.
The left loves nothing more than to gaslight by using a language game, and that's one of those things of just rejecting their terms, but also rejecting their game on this. I mean, one of the issues was when my bill didn't move, right? Usually that just means, well, maybe next year. I worked in the interim. I connected with my folks in Washington, D.C., because one of the reasons I introduced this bill in the first place is that it is a violation of federal law to give a benefit to an illegal immigrant that is not available to all U.S. citizens. In-state tuition is only available to residents of Kentucky. A resident of Ohio does not get in-state tuition unless there's a reciprocity agreement. A resident in California does not get in-state tuition. So it's a violation of federal law. It violates the Article 6 of the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause. So I worked my network and got this in the hands of the Department of Justice. And fortunately, they took notice and they filed a lawsuit against Andy Beshear, against the Council on Post-Secondary Education, trying to get in-state tuition terminated. So for me, yes, I am in session only part-time, but I am serving the people of Kentucky full-time, particularly by being a good steward of their tax dollars and making sure that we're not wasting it on something that no reasonable Kentuckian has ever voted for, because we as a legislature never passed a law authorizing this. It came directly through administrative regulation, and it is costing Kentuckians millions of dollars every single year. And this is just such a crucial thing to realize, is that there are consequences to these feel-good gaslighting operations that happen. through the lobbying class, and we need to look to those consequences when we're voting as legislators, and we need to reclaim our role as the lawmakers.
Well, and I think hitting on an important thing you kind of mentioned there is legislators aren't just about what they vote on or don't vote on, right? Obviously, it's also you can use that position, whether it's correct or incorrect, but that position of being a quote-unquote authority in certain people's minds. Obviously, if I call up the Department of Justice and say, oh, Bashir's offering illegal immigrants in-state tuition rates, it probably gets more put into a bin than if somebody calls up and says, I'm the state house rep of this district, this is what's going on. They say, well, this is somebody who would know that. And that's just a natural thing humans do. And so it provides that kind of that pulpit of sorts to preach from. But at the same time, it's a great example of how while you are just a legislator, you are also a citizen still, and you do have these other courses of redress if you decide to go ahead and do that. I'd love to hear about some of your successes that you feel like you've had over your first session, and then also discuss a little bit about some of the different votes you took as far as that goes here in this next segment. I know, though, right off the top, I mean, one that was pretty big for you was the sales tax on gold situation, where last year they'd filed in the revenue bill an exemption onto precious metals such as gold, and then Bashir was going through and saying, look, I don't want to enforce that. I don't want to put that forward. And this past session, you really put forward a bill to hold the screws to him. So I know we'll want to discuss that, but before we go to break here, where can people find out more about you?
Yes, so my website is votetjr.com. You can follow me on X at RealTJRoberts, and also I'm on Facebook. Most of my Facebook is just me copying what I put on X. If you really want to interact with me, that is the best way to do it. I also give out my personal cell number. It's 859-446-0185.
Well, thank you, TJ. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about legislation. We'll see you guys shortly.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back here on Kentucky's Voice, speaking with Representative TJ Roberts. If you like the conversation, as always, you can check out the Andrew Cooperrider Show right here on 970 on Sundays at 6 p.m. and Wednesdays at 11 on WBNA if you want to see this beautiful, handsome face. But yes, I'm joined by Representative TJ Roberts. We're going to dig into some of the bills that he put forward that were some good successes, not good successes, but successes that you had this session as far as that goes. One was the sales tax on precious metals. What happened here? Kind of give the background for those who don't know.
Yes, so in 2024, we had the revenue bill, House Bill 8. This is where we figure out what's getting taxed, what's exempt from the taxes. Representative Steve Doan put in yeoman's work, and he was able to get language put in and across the finish line that got rid of the sales tax on gold, silver, platinum bullion. So coins, bars. People love to say it's a tax break for the rich, but an ounce of silver is $30. You are able to use gold and silver as retirement savings, as emergency funds, because it keeps its value. I've always been of the opinion that gold and silver are the only real honest money under the United States Constitution. And I think if we had kept to the gold standard, we would not see the inflation that we see right now. And I don't think we should tax money. Well, Governor Andy Bashir disagrees, and he thinks of himself as a king. So when we passed this, he did a line item veto. The problem, though, is that line item vetoes are only constitutional for spending bills. House Bill 8 was our revenue bill.
You know, it's amazing how many times this governor has just cooked up his own stressed interpretation of bills. I mean, obviously, we have the issue right now going on of where he has cooked up a cost to associate bills and then decides if you don't give him that amount of money, he's not enforcing that law. That's an issue going on right now, I know. But also, when it came to this, where he line item vetoes in bills that no governor has ever line item vetoed a revenue bill before. And yet he comes through and says, no, I think I can do it this time because, I'm allowed to line item veto a budget.
Right.
But, and line item vetoing, for those who are unaware, is where you strike a specific clause, a sentence, segment from a bill. So you prove the rest of the bill, but you strike one portion of the bill and say, hey, you can't do that. Now, that's allowed on budget bills where you can go through and say, I don't want to spend this money. I don't want to spend this money, or delete words. But in revenue bills, historically, that's never been something the governor's allowed to do.
And right. So it was completely illegal. The Secretary of State ruled that the line item veto was not well taken. The Attorney General ruled it was not well taken. And so the legislature enrolled this bill. So after the 2024 session, if you looked at our laws on things that are exempt from the sales tax, gold, silver, platinum, bullion was on that list. Then in August, the governor does an executive order directing the Department of Revenue to continue collecting the taxes. So he has just completely said that, well, the legislature doesn't have the power to tax. I, the governor, do. I mean, frankly, and to the point of him refusing to implement laws, saying he doesn't have the money, much of those laws are laws telling him not to spend money. He's saying he can't afford to not spend money. And frankly, we should be considering impeachment under Section 66 of the Kentucky Constitution over it. Andy Beshear is a sticky-fingered little tyrant using your tax dollars to go on to go on vacations, to rub shoulders with the elites in Davos, but also to illegally tax you. So I introduced a bill that was numbered as House Bill 2 that made it to where if you were illegally taxed on gold and silver and platinum purchases, you were entitled to a refund with interest and attorney fees through a class action lawsuit. It allows you to subvert all of the administrative appeals processes because those are kangaroo courts. Usually, if you're taxed improperly, you have to go to the Tax Board of Appeals. Well, those folks are all appointed by Andy Beshear, so who's going to actually guard the guardsmen? That's where the judicial branch should come in. So House Bill 2 not only reaffirmed this provision, getting rid of the tax on gold and silver bullion, but it also made clear that the legislature is the branch with the power of the purse, is the branch with the power of taxation, not the governor. So this was a protection of separation of powers, which I think are sacred under a constitutional republic, that Andy Beshear disregards every single day, that he acts like a king in the governor's mansion.
So looking now, though, at your first session, was there any votes or bills or things that you look at and you say, I wish I didn't vote that way, or I didn't, looking at that bill, I didn't realize the full repercussions of it? And I know nobody ever likes to admit, when they took a bad vote or when they're wrong or anything else. But is there any of those situations where you're like, looking back, I think I would have played that differently or voted differently?
Yes, most certainly. And one of those bills, I voted for a bill in committee that I just did not understand the consequences of. And when the consequences were revealed to me of what this bill would do, one, I did work on efforts to make sure that it didn't get to the floor because it clearly had a
real
problem.
quick. The bill in question, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was, I forget the number, but it was on
It was House
something
Bill
called
96.
House Bill 96, and it was something called coercive control. Essentially, it made it to where you could file, and once again, correct me if I'm wrong, a EO, a protection order, if somebody made a mean Facebook post about you.
So I don't think so. So I'm going to be level. I don't think the language would have done that after the committee substitute. The original language would have, and I would have been an absolute no on the original language. The committee substitute took it from speech to conduct, which I thought mostly addressed the situations, but the situation is not even in the bill text. The situation is actually heavily concealed by bureaucrats in our judiciary. And it's something that I did not realize because I don't do family law. Family law is just an area that I do not have the emotional wherewithal to do.
And that's who deals with protection orders normally.
Yes.
Of course.
And this bill would have expanded EPOs to various courses of conduct that I don't think should be protected. Threatening someone, just absolutely literally controlling every aspect of someone's life through actual coercion, threatening violence, threatening to kill someone's animal, their kids, right? All that stuff should be illegal. But the problem is this is about an EPO, which is ex parte. Federal law prohibits those with domestic violence restraining orders from possessing a firearm. The Supreme Court affirmed the constitutionality of that, which I have issues with it. I think that the facial challenge was, it was bad facts that created bad law. And so that said, though, the federal law requires that the person have an opportunity to be heard. They can present evidence. They can cross-examine witnesses. EPOs do not allow that, so I assumed that the federal law did not apply. But then you look at the form for an EPO, it explicitly says that those with EPOs in Kentucky cannot possess a firearm. We never codified that. And I was completely unaware of that in committee. But the moment that I saw that, and I had law enforcement reaching out to me and telling me, yes, these ex parte orders are resulting in gun confiscations in Kentucky, not only did I immediately regret that vote drastically, I called up folks to make sure, like, hey, this is a serious problem. And I would like to think that that is part of the reason why it didn't come to the floor. I appreciate the sponsor's willingness to work with me on the substance, but we need to do something because this motivated me in determining one of my top priorities in 2026. The reality is this. Without any legislative enactments, Kentucky's judiciary has created a red flag gun confiscation regime in Kentucky, and it has to stop. We have to do away with ex parte gun confiscations entirely.
So real quick, you're saying a lot of words. I'm tracking what you're saying, but I think there's maybe some listeners that may not be tracking exactly what we're discussing here. So there's a bill to expand the situations in which a protection order, a domestic violence protection order, is given out. Now, I don't know what the committee sub exactly said. I know the original bill could definitely be interpreted to things such as if you're married, husband, wife married, husband has a credit card in his name that the wife used to have access to, that then the husband says, we're going through a divorce. This credit card's only in my name. I don't want you going out and spending a bunch of money I'm on the hook for. So you're no longer allowed access to my credit card with my name on it. That would be considered financial control, coercive control through financial means, and they would be allowed to grant basically a domestic violence order because you won't give your wife who you're divorcing the credit card in your name. And because of how Kentucky's judiciary has decided to interpret EPO laws and push forward, that results in gun confiscation for the order. So you could be in a position where you simply are going through divorce and you tell your wife, hey, your soon-to-be ex-wife, hey, you can't have access to my credit card anymore because I don't want you spending money willy-nilly that I'm on the hook for. And as a result of that, it could end with you no longer being allowed to own firearms.
That was in the original language, yes. I'm quite confident that was taken out in the committee sub, but frankly, even with the committee sub, I still shouldn't have voted for that. I have a general rule. If you allow me to aid in drafting legislation, I will ultimately vote for it. But I'm going to be blunt. I'm not interested in working on EPO language unless we are taking out the ability of courts to take your firearms without your opportunity to be heard, without your opportunity to cross-examine witnesses, without your opportunity to present evidence. The fact is, the Second Amendment is sacred. I had no clue that was in that language, and I absolutely regret having not seen that. But that being said, that's one of the things about the legislative process where, yes, it's a shame that a whole lot of these good bills don't move, but the legislative process also is good at killing bad language from unintended consequences. And that would have been an unintended consequence that would have disparaged the rights of 4.5 million Kentuckians. So one of my top priorities is making sure in 2026 we pass language that prohibits a court from ever taking your firearms without your ability to be heard and present evidence and
Because
have
ex
full
parte,
due process.
when you're talking about ex parte,
Yes.
that means you're not present for that hearing.
Yes.
Just so everybody, if you heard them talk about ex parte hearings, it means they were having hearings about granting domestic EPOs where they can take away your firearms without you being allowed to be there and argue your case. And you view that obviously as a due process violation of your Second Amendment rights. Well, coming up after this, we'll dig into maybe a little bit more about some votes and things, but then dig into what's going on this next session. We'll be back in a few short minutes.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. If you want to join in to the conversation here, go ahead and just shoot us a text message, 502-571-0970. Once again, that is 502-571-0970. And as always, if you like what you're hearing, well, you can tune into the Andrew Cooperrider Show right here on 970, Sundays at 6 p.m., and on WBNA Wednesdays at 11. If you're like, oh, geez, that guy, I just need to look at him. I just got to see him when he talks. That's when you can do that right here. But I'm joined by Representative TJ Roberts. We've been discussing kind of his first session in the legislature, discussing some different votes as far as that goes. And there is one vote, and you know this, and we talked beforehand, and this was a important one to me, was House Bill 399, and in its original form, it would have made it a felony to do something called interfering with the legislative process. Now, to be clear, I believe there's not even a law at the federal level per se that is this expansive, and essentially it was that if you were in the chambers and started protesting, that would now become a full crime and potentially a felony. And if you were, the way the bill was originally wrote, if you were too loudly protesting to where it would interfere. So you're outside the chambers in the Capitol Rotunda and you start chanting loudly, and it was too loud. If it got too loud, they could consider that interfering with the legislative process. And then it also adds into coordinating to interfere with the legislative process. Now, this has happened to me where I have organized protests at the state capitol that I was unable then to attend. I had a medical emergency. I was in the hospital. It's funny, my nurse was actually like, aren't you supposed to be up at the Capitol right now? And I was like, oh no, can I trust this nurse or not? What side is she on? But, and so I wasn't even there. And if that protest had gotten too loud, I technically could have also been held legally liable, potentially with a felony, depending on how many times I've done it. What's discussed about that? House Bill 399. What was your take on it originally and kind of what happened to it? Because I know you ended up voting for it on the floor, but and some others voted no that kind of ideologically typically align with you. What's going on there?
Yeah, so I voted no in committee because with that original draft language, you were 100% correct. It was unconstitutional that if you're too loud outside in a place where free speech is protected, that could be a felony. So I voted against that. I saw the momentum of that bill and knew full well whatever form it was in, that was going to get to the governor's desk and they would absolutely override his veto. So what I did was I filed 3 floor amendments that ultimately became one. So the first thing that the amendment did, it made clear that this section does not apply in a traditional public forum. So the Capitol Rotunda, the hallways, the outdoor areas, this does not apply. So pretty much the only places where you can be charged with interference with a legislative proceeding is the gallery, which is right above the House floor of the or the Senate floor, and committee meeting rooms when a committee is actually being conducted. Those are the only 3 places on the face of the earth where such a charge can come about. The second amendment that I threw in made it to where you had to be charged and convicted 3 times before it's a felony. I think if you engage in overt acts that are so egregious that the legislature cannot function, you are robbing the taxpayers. So at that point, after a 3rd offense, okay, that I understand where we're coming from. I do think we have way too many felonies on the books, but I can at least stomach a third offense at that point, because the probability, you have to try to get to that point. And the Third Amendment, I actually think, was the most important part, because the language originally made it to where the sergeant at arms in Kentucky State Police were entirely subjugated to the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, or the committee chairman, where they had to make an arrest upon the request of these individuals. And I think that's a Fourth Amendment violation. I think officers are obligated under federal law to make their own independent determination of probable cause. And whether it's this current leadership or future generations, I don't want the power to demand an arrest to be in the hands of a legislator. It opened the risk to government weaponization, so I did an amendment as well that made clear that, yes, the sergeant at arms must remove someone from the gallery upon the request of these individuals, but that's already the law. But that they may make an arrest upon their own independent determination of probable cause. So at this point, it wasn't you're being too loud outside. It's not you're being too loud in the rotunda. It's you are in the gallery. You are engaged in not speech, but conduct that is so severe that the legislature cannot conduct business. So it became so much more narrow that I think any of the constitutional concerns were addressed. I voted for it on the floor. I ultimately voted to sustain the veto. It's the only veto of the governor that I have voted to sustain. And the reason why was I said I'll vote for it on the floor with these amendments for the passage to send it over to the Senate. That being said, there are still concerns with it, but I think that with those amendments, I think we got to that process because, yes, liberty is essential, the ability to do as one will, but you don't have liberty if you don't have order. This bill largely emerged out of what I call the Senate Bill 150 riots, where individuals were engaged not in speech, but in blatant conduct, throwing things onto the House floor, just shouting down to the point that the legislature could not function because these individuals were so upset at the fact that we were finally, after 4 years of effort from Representative Savannah Maddox, Representative Jennifer Decker, and so many others, to ban the gender mutilation of children. Look, liberty doesn't include the right to riot. So with those amendments, it more or less just became a minor anti-riot bill, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Like I said, there's different takes on it as far as it goes. And, you know, for me, obviously, I felt strongly about it just because I don't like to make things felonies I've done before. Not that I've thrown things on the floor.
I don't think you've ever been a disruption in the gallery.
I've never created disruption in the gallery. That is true.
And some of those rallies we were organizing. So.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, there were troubles. Not by us, but there was a few times where we got pretty loud, for sure. And so that's what I was mainly concerned about. Well, we're moving into the final 5 minutes. If you want to talk to the show real quick, ask TJ a question, you can text us at 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. Now, TJ, moving into these final 5 minutes here, we're coming up on the session here next year. It's the longer session year, and most importantly, it is the budget year where they go ahead and they make the 2-year budget for the state of Kentucky. In what situations would you vote for a budget, and what situations are you going to refuse to vote for a budget?
Getting me to vote for a budget is going to be an uphill battle. And the reason why is because when I hit the green button on a budget, here in Kentucky, we're a balanced budget commonwealth. Every dollar I am voting to spend on, I am going to have to vote to tax you on. And I think there is so much waste, fraud, and abuse, particularly in our base level of spending, that we could abolish the income tax and the property tax on your vehicle and your primary residence and still maintain the essential functions of government of roads, bridges, police, firefighters, courts, and the like. I think we can absolutely maintain the essential role of government without income or property taxes, and I don't think we're going to see taxes commensurate enough for me to vote for it. A few practical things. I will not vote for a budget that has a base. And for those of you who are not aware, we only voted on 9% of this year's spending in our 2024 budget session. 91% of the budget is what's known as the base. And this is pretty much the executive branch, the judicial branches, just doing whatever they want with that money. And it's shrouded in secrecy. It's hard to really pin down what exactly they're spending this money on. So I believe that the legislature has the pure power of the purse. I think it's unconstitutional to give this much deference on it. So I will not vote for anything that has...
And to clear up kind of there so people understand, so essentially the way they've budgeted in the past and what you say you will not vote for is a budget that essentially goes to something like Cabinet for Health and Family Services and says, we're going to give you $200 million as your budget, you spend it on what you want to. Or turns to, all these different economic development departments, says, here's $500 million, spend it how you want to, spend it on what you feel's right. And I think that's important too. I would like to see the legislature push for it because, as we touched on earlier, we have Bashir right now refusing to implement laws that are passed because he's saying, look, we believe this is an unfunded mandate. You had to give me $8 million more. Well, we actually already gave that department that is in charge of enforcing that law $200 million. You're saying you're not willing now to cut off $8 million of it to enforce a newly passed law that we can argue whether or not it really costs that much. And so you're saying, look, we already spent this $200 million, so if you want us to enforce this law, you got to give us more money. I say if he's going to play this game with every single law, well, let's line item budget him. I want him to know he can only spend $1,000 this year on pencils, $1,000 this year on paper.
Right.
Like that level of budgeting and kind of say, look, we can't trust you. You've proven that. We can't trust you because when we pass a law, you don't want to implement it unless we give you more money. You don't know how to budget.
That's correct. We have a boy king in the governor's mansion, and I think it's time that we take his toys away. I believe in zero-based budgeting. I think we need to be far more careful with it. So that's one of my number one things. I also will not vote for a budget that gives a single penny to Planned Parenthood. We currently mostly do not, but we still give Planned Parenthood money through Medicaid. The Supreme Court of the United States just said we can defund Medicaid to Planned Parenthood. So I will not vote for a budget that gives Medicaid spending to Planned Parenthood. I will not vote for a budget that raises the overall level of spending as well.
And that's happened year over year. I mean, I don't think since Bevin was the last time we had a budget go down one time, and then otherwise it's just gone up, and that's just crazy considering how long Republicans have been in control. Well, thanks, TJ, for joining us today. Where can people learn more about you, follow you?
Yes, please follow me on X at RealTJRoberts. You can go to my campaign website, votetjr.com, to learn more about how I am bringing grassroots conservative values to Frankfort. And I hope you guys will follow me and shoot me a text, 859-446-0185.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.